Sì, è stato strappato, ma anche la parte dei gancetti.
This was also torn.
Yes, it's torn, but also the hook part.
It was torn, yes.
Here the hook part is missing from the clasp. A piece of the hook is missing.
Well, yes.
Manca il pezzo del gancetto.
Sì.
It's November 2nd, 2007, just a few hours after Meredith's body had been discovered. The forensic police officers are wearing white protective suits, working inside the house of Via della Pergola to collect material. They've located a bra. The biologist Patrizia Stefanoni lifts it, grabbing it by the lace connecting the cups. The clasp is missing, it's being torn. She turns the bra over and over, allowing her colleagues to study it closer.
Però il fatto, una cosa che è intriso di...
But the fact is that it's soaked in blood, so she had it on at the time she was killed.
The bra is soaked in blood, meaning Meredith was wearing it when she was killed. 4 months later, at the Rome Institute of Forensic Medicine, a knife with a blade more than 17 centimeters, or nearly 7 inches, long, was examined before the parties.
Allora ha una lunghezza di 17,4-17,5.
So, the length is 17.4, 17.5 centimeters, and from the blade side 7.8 to 18.
17.3 from the opposite side and 18 from the blade.
And the blade is slightly crooked and the handle is also crooked.
Lievemente sghemba
È l'impugnatura che scherza, sì.
This knife was found among the kitchenware in Raffaele's house. The bra, or rather its clasp, along with the knife, will be the two main pieces of evidence on which the prosecution will base its case, and it will constitute what will be defined as the conclusive proof. But it will be those two same findings that will eventually overturn the verdict.
Murder in Perugia, an exclusive 7-part podcast series by investigative journalist Antonio Giovane. Episode 5, Hidden Evidence.
Un buon avvocato, un ottimo...
A good lawyer, an excellent lawyer. I'm not saying one can alone determine the outcome of a trial, but they can certainly significantly influence it. In this specific case, lawyer Giulia Bongiorno did an outstanding job in this trial. At least, let's say, from the point of view of her client, compared to their counterpart.
Alla sua controparte.
How much influence did lawyers have in the Perugia trials? And not just their strategies, but their ability to influence, to strike a chord. How much did their ability to communicate with the press or to find the most evocative formulas matter? La Repubblica journalist Carlo Bonini believes that the skills of Giulia Bongiorno, the defense attorney for Raffaele Sollecito, stood out.
È riuscita in una vicenda dove non esistevano.
She succeeded in a case that did not offer overwhelming evidence against the defendants, but where the prosecution had a series of circumstantial evidence, some of which later turned out to be, let's say, inconsistent. Bongiorno managed to sow that doubt, which would then allow Amanda and Raffaele Sollecito to win on appeal.
Ha consentito ad Amanda e a Raffaele Sollecito di vincere il processo.
Yes, Bongiorno did well in raising multiple doubts. Giulia Bongiorno has been a conservative member of both the Italian Parliament and Senate and is a distant relative of Mike Bongiorno, a popular Italian television personality of American origins. She has defended many prominent clients, including Giulio Andreotti, who served multiple times as Prime Minister of Italy and was accused of having mafia connections. Over time, she has gained a reputation as Italy's most renowned criminal defense lawyer. Of course, she's not the only lawyer to note. There are other attorneys who play a central role in the case of Meredith Kercher's murder. Defending Amanda are Luciano Ghirga and Carlo Della Vedova, who offers a passionate critique of the way the media portray his client.
Ma chi è stata qui che è stata crocifissa?
We see how she was crucified, impaled in the public square, how she became the object of the most vile speculations, going so far as to damage the person's most basic rights and freedoms.
La libertà della persona, soprattutto.
And then there are Walter Biscotti and Nicodemo Gentile, with his colorful dissertations, who defend Rudy.
Non vogliamo clemenza, vogliamo sentenza giusta.
We don't want clemency. We want a fair sentence. What is the alternative? The alternative is the decision of the fortune teller magistrate, the acrobat, who doesn't let himself be constrained by the rules.
Che non si lascia imbrigliare dalle norme.
Finally, there is the lawyer representing the victim's family, Francesco Maresca, who always maintains his composure, never crosses the line.
Ancora una volta la famiglia Kercher accetterà il...
Once again, the Kircher family will accept the decision of the Italian judges, and I with them.
E io con loro.
How important are lawyers in the end? Lawyers in this trial aren't just mere orators. In Perugia, it's not just what happens inside the courtroom that counts, but also what happens outside. Lawyers speak to the press. They do it constantly. They need to know how to manage their client's image, not only in court, but also in public opinion. In such a high-profile trial like the one in Perugia, they must be able to convince the press in a straightforward manner. There's no gray area. Their clients are not executioners, but victims. Faced with the public portrayal of Amanda and Raffaele as two shrewd and cynical characters, Giulia Bongiorno evokes a pair of fictional characters. We've already heard her compare Amanda to Jessica Rabbit, and their client, Raffaele
Sollecito ha avuto un evento simile.
Raffaele Sollecito was facing a situation similar to what would happen to Forrest Gump, in the sense that anyone who knows the story of Forrest Gump knows that he's a pure and modest man, to whom enormous crazy things happen, and who thus finds himself practically thrown into an almost fantasy reality that he never asked for.
In una realtà quasi di fantasia che non ha mai voluto.
Raffaele Sollecito as Forrest Gump. Presented with such portrayals, however, the two defendants would never prove entirely convincing. They contradicted themselves, denied everything, and hid behind too many times of saying, "I don't remember." Sollecito's attorneys called to testify a medical examiner, Francesco Introna, and with the help of two assistants, he had simulated the murder for the court. Attorney Donati, who plays Meredith, and Dr. Corrado, who plays the attacker. In the courtroom, the doctor led the simulation. Dr. Corrado grabs a switchblade and positions herself behind Attorney Donati.
The first moment is an attack from behind, closing off the airways, blocking off the head, a threat with the knife on the cheek.
Dr. Corrado puts her hand on the lawyer Donati's mouth and points the knife with her right hand at the victim's cheek.
The victim is not grabbed, she is blocked from breathing, and the attacker reassures the victim, probably at this moment saying, "Stay still, I won't hurt you," or something like that.
"Stay still, I won't hurt you," the attacker says in the courtroom reconstruction. Then comes a moment of the sexual assault. Meredith is without panties and the attacker pushes her down onto all fours. In the courtroom, Dr. Corrado simulates the blow to the neck of lawyer Donati, who struggles because the blow was not lethal. The hyoid bone is hit. The victim can no longer speak or scream.
She is bleeding from an arterial wound, stops breathing and falls. As she falls, she hits her head.
According to the medical examiner, this dynamic reconstruction is consistent with all the bruises and injuries found in the autopsy. In short, say Sollecito's attorneys, there was only one person who struck the victim, and that person's name is Rudy Guede. This theory, however, did not convince the lower court. But the defense team had also begun to sow another doubt. Is the genetic evidence that influenced the outcome of the trial truly valid? The scientific team led by Patrizia Stefanoni had collected several pieces of evidence. There was a footprint compatible with Raffaele's found on the bathroom mat. There were traces of Amanda's blood in the bathroom, but above all, there was the knife found in Sollecito's house and the clasp that had come loose from the bra. On the handle of the knife were traces of DNA attributable to Amanda. So far, nothing unusual. The American could have used it for cooking. But on the blade, there was other DNA, and that DNA is Meredith's. On the clasp of the bra, however, there was Raffaele's DNA. The judges, in the first instance, spoke of formidable confirmation of the prosecution's hypothesis. But on appeal, things changed.
Pronto? Professore, che han deciso?
On December 18th, 2010, Franco Sollecito, Raffaele's father, called Adriano Tagliabracci, a geneticist and family consultant, The judge had to decide on a possible new genetic assessment, super partes. The defense had already requested it. After the first verdict, judge denied it. The lawyers maintained that the evidence was contaminated, meaning that the evidence may be invalid because it may have been in contact with external agents. And so, there is good news for Sollecito's father.
Allora, hanno riaperto il dibattimento. Ok, l'hanno riaperto sopra e si danno la verifica.
So, the fund's about to start again. They've reopened the case, and they're looking at the genetic evidence.
Very good.
There will be Professor Conti of Rome Sapienza University.
Conti?
Conti?
I don't know him.
Ah, okay.
Professor Conti?
Yes, from Sapienza, together with another professor, also from Sapienza University of Rome.
Professor Vecchiotti?
Yes, exactly, Vecchiotti.
I know her very well.
Okay.
Conosco molto bene.
Ok.
The new genetic assessment will therefore be carried out by Carla Vecchiotti and Stefano Conti. With the granting of the new genetic assessment, Sollecito's father and Professor Tagliabracci are feeling optimistic.
Questa è già una mezza vittoria.
This is already a victory.
Yes, and they will also have to express their opinion regarding contamination.
Ah, good.
The possible contamination, not just the interpretation of the data.
Good, very good. I'm really satisfied.
The court has now reconvened on the issue of suspension of the pretrial detention.
Let's hope we get the jackpot soon.
All right. That's what we are looking for.
Speriamo di fare il bottino pieno, via.
Va bene, noi basta questo.
And on appeal, on October 3rd, 2011, at 9:43 p.m., the jackpot arrives.
In nome del popolo italiano, la Corte di Assise di Appello di Perugia.
I remember her. Amanda Knox sitting in one of the front rows, the long green t-shirt, the coat. I remember her trembling while Judge Claudio Pratillo-Hellman read the sentence. I remember Sollecito's gesture towards his lawyer, Giulia Bongiorno. She was very tense. I remember that he touched her shoulder as if to reassure her. On the right, there was also the bench with the Kircher family, Meredith's mother, sister and brother.
In parziale riforma della sentenza pronunciata in data 4-5 dicembre 2009.
I remember 3 Carabinieri police officers, including a larger woman, who lined up in front of Amanda to prevent the journalists from even seeing her. I was one of many looking for an opening, a glimpse to observe her reaction. At the word guilty, someone starts to whisper.
Knox Amanda Marie colpevole del reato di calunnia, di cui al capo F.
But that guilty sentence was for the crime of slander against Patrick Lumumba. The judge's voice resonates in the silence. 2.5 minutes must pass before the key words are reached.
Assolve entrambi gli imputati dai reati loro ascritti ai capi A, B, C.
Acquitted. Both defendants of the crimes listed under counts A, B, C, and D for not having committed the act, and of the crime listed under count E because the act does not exist.
Perché il fatto non sussiste.
Marina Baldi is a forensic geneticist, which means she analyzes biological traces at crime scenes. Throughout her career, she has provided expert reports for many of Italy's most notable criminal cases. I met her in her office in the Salario district of Rome. The professor has studied the Perugia case and has the conclusions of the 2 expert reports with her. She told me that real crime scenes are different from how they are usually depicted.
Difficilmente c'è una stanza vuota con dentro un cadavere per terra, ecco.
There's hardly ever just an empty room with a dead body on the floor. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of objects. So I have no interest in criticizing the people who carried out the inspection, because it can happen that you run into difficulties. The person who carries out the inspection is never the person who is in the laboratory. I've been doing DNA for 40 years, and if I were to go to do an inspection, I would make a terrible mess, because I clearly don't have the manual dexterity to be able to have the peace of mind to touch things, change my gloves, remember not to touch. These are very difficult
La serenità
procedures.
di toccare le cose, cambiarmi i guanti, ricordarmi di non toccare, cioè sono delle procedure difficilissime.
I asked her about the Stefanoni report, the one performed by the forensic officer who first reached the crime scene. She explains that the report established the presence of several Y chromosomes on the bra clasp, which are attributable to males.
Uno di questi è sicuramente...
One of these is certainly that of Raffaele Sollecito. The evidence cannot be denied.
Non è che si può negare l'evidenza.
Traces of Raffaele's DNA were found on Meredith's bra clasp, along with those of 2 other males who are still unknown. Evidence was later found on the knife found in Sollecito's home. Meredith's DNA was on the blade, and Amanda's DNA was on the handle.
Quindi quella fu identificata come...
So that was identified as the murder weapon. Because if, on the one hand, Amanda's DNA could have been present on the handle because she was dating Sollecito, even if only for a few days, so she could have handled the knife in the kitchen, the presence of Meredith's DNA on the blade had no reason to exist. So that was at the time of the first analyses and reports an element of reference to identify that knife as the murder weapon. Keeping in mind, however, that that knife had been found in Raffaele's kitchen, clean and inside the drawer.
Tenendo presente però che quel coltello era stato trovato nella cucina di Raffaele, pulito dentro al cassetto.
The DNA is therefore traceable to Raffaele, as regard to the bra clasp, and to Amanda, as regarding the knife. The Vecchiotti Conti expert report, however, completely reverses the picture. The forensic police made some errors. The bra clasp, first of all, was not immediately recovered.
Come si sono accorti di questo gancetto? Hanno fatto le fotografie.
How did they notice this hook? Did they take the photographs correctly during the first inspection? They went back to the lab, and while evaluating the findings that matched the photographs taken, they noticed that that hook was not present among the findings, even though it was photographed and was in a certain position near Meredith's body. So they had to go back to the crime scene, which had been completely turned upside down by all the inspections, by all the people who came in and out, and this hook was found under the desk, therefore in a completely different position, all crumpled and dirty. So unfortunately, it is an unusable object, an unusable piece of evidence, because it was no longer in its original condition.
Purtroppo un gancetto non utilizzabile, un reperto non utilizzabile perché non era più nelle condizioni originali.
In short, there is the possibility that the hook, found 46 days after the crime and found under a rug 1.5 meters away from where it was photographed, was contaminated. That Raffaele's DNA, in short, was present on the clasp days after the crime. Several videos also show the moments when the evidence was collected. In court, Conti and Vecchiotti stated that the gloves used to collect the clasp were dirty and that masks, tweezers and shoe covers were not used correctly. That you can see a person in jeans at the crime scene and the videographer entering the house where no internal or external protective areas had been set up.
Eh sì, quelli sono stati poi gli errori che hanno un po' invalidato la situazione.
Yes, those were the errors that to some degree invalidated the situation. In fact, there are the infamous photographs of the glove that indicates the clasp, which is a glove full of dust and dirt. So this means that this glove touched something else, and so how can we exclude that it wasn't the glove that perhaps had a small trace of the Y chromosome that made it stick to the clasp? It can't be excluded, and so we always have to be cautious to protect the rights of defendants.
E allora bisogna essere sempre garantisti, no?
I asked the professor if she doesn't still consider it unlikely that Sollecito's DNA contaminated that find after the crime.
Questo è improbabile, però sappiamo che il DNA
This is unlikely, but we know that Raffaele's DNA was also found elsewhere, on cigarettes in the kitchen. But that isn't much because, I repeat, they recently started dating, and in any case that house had plenty of people in it. Every time we do analyses, you must always consider that DNA evidence is not the conclusive evidence as some want to define it today, but it is an aid to investigations. So we must always, I repeat, be careful to consider that there could be a post-event or pre-event contamination, not necessarily during the crime.
So you're saying that if the attribution cannot be 100% certain, it is not valid?
And if, above all, there could be any reason X why that hook could have been contaminated, it cannot be used as definitive evidence.
Possa essersi contaminato, non può essere utilizzato come unica prova.
The bra clasp, therefore, is not valid proof. But let's look at the knife. The blade contained Meredith's DNA, while the handle contained Amanda's. Yet, says Professor Baldi, Meredith's genetic material was so minimal that the attribution cannot be certain.
Lì era un DNA a talmente bassa concentrazione.
There was such a low concentration of DNA there that, in fact, it could not be considered usable. Meredith's profile was obtained from many different traces, a little here, a little there. So it is unthinkable that you consider an entire profile with a few allelites here, a few allelites there. That is, let's say that the basic rules, recommendations in reality, which are promulgated by all scientific societies, were not respected. So in fact that was not a usable profile.
Quindi di fatto quello non era un profilo utilizzabile.
What's more, the amount of genetic material was so insufficient that those alleles, that is, the gene sequences, could have belonged to anyone, says Professor Baldi.
Quegli alleli ce li posso avere pure io. Questa è una frase.
Can I have those alleles too? This is a sentence that Professor Vecchiotti said when she was questioned in court. That is, when we have few alleles, too few alleles, we risk involving someone that maybe we had nothing to do with. This is a fact. It's a bit like blood groups, right? So there are 4 blood groups. Why aren't they used for attribution? Because, for example, 25%, 28% of the population has blood group A positive. So if I find blood group A, I can't use it to, let's say, attribute that trace to someone. I certainly can use it to exclude someone from group B.
Certamente mi serve per escludere uno che ha il sangue B.
It's even possible that there was potato starch on the blade instead of Meredith's DNA, as if the knife hadn't simply been washed properly. But would anything have changed with today's techniques?
Chi lo sa? Questo non ho la sfera di cristallo.
Who knows? I don't have a crystal ball, I'd like to know, but surely today we have far more sensitive techniques, and therefore many cases are reopened and solved. But it must also be said that unfortunately many findings are used, and therefore it is not easy to then be able to find other traces once they have already been analyzed. So maybe yes.
Poi riuscire a ritrovare altre tracce quando sono stati già analizzati. Quindi non lo so, forse sì.
There's more, according to the appeal judge. Heroin use undermined the credibility of the witness Curatolo, the homeless man who said he saw the 2 boys in Piazza Grimana. Heroin's effects also include a chronic tendency to lie. It also causes confusion about dates. The evening after Halloween, the nightclubs were closed, and the shuttle service to take the boys to the nightclub wasn't running. Curatolo therefore couldn't have seen the boys boarding the shuttles to go to the nightclub. There are also too many doubts about the time of Meredith's death. Giuliano Mignini, however, challenges the court's findings, starting with its composition.
They took the magistrate of the Social Security section, Pratillo, and the counsellor of the labor section, Zanetti, and put them on this homicide trial. I won't say anything else about this choice. Let's just say that at the initial hearing of the appeal, the rapporteur says that the only certain thing about this trial is Meredith's death. My colleague and I stand up, and I also go to Maresca, the lawyer for the Kircher family, and I say this judge must be dismissed. You can't already have a presumption of the outcome of the trial before it opens.
In short, according to Mignini, Pratillo Herman, with that phrase, had already nullified the conclusions of the original ruling. Then there is the question of the new expert opinion granted by the judge on the genetic material. And here too, Mignini is critical.
You do the expert assessment if you don't have the evidence, not if you have the evidence, but you have to decide which to use. Instead, they are gods. They had this way of reasoning. The prosecutor has his consultant, the defense has its consultant, we judges have to appoint our own expert. It means that you delegate the decision to the expert.
Mignini finally contests the conclusions of the experts De Chiotti and Conti on the contamination.
Quello che hai ottenuto, diciamo, è sospetto.
What you got, let's say, is suspicion of contamination. Suspicion is therefore equivalent to contamination. That is, if I say that this is a seismic zone and therefore an earthquake is possible, saying this and then saying the earthquake occurred is the same thing. This is the expert's reasoning.
Verificato è la stessa cosa. Questo è il ragionamento dei periti.
But the judge still deemed the genetic evidence invalid. With the acquittal, Amanda bursts into tears. Her family cries. Sollecito smiles and hugs his lawyer, but Amanda doesn't move. Amanda is all emotion, her face transfigured by tears, her back hunched over.
Ordina l'immediata liberazione di Knox, Amanda, Marie e Sollecito Raffaele, se non detenuti per altra causa. Per favore. Silenzio! Silenzio, per favore! Silenzio!
Then she's taken away, escorted by the Carabinieri police once again. Raffaele and Amanda spend the night in undisclosed separate locations. The next day, Amanda leaves Rome's Fiumicino airport at 11 a.m. Once in Seattle, she speaks in front of journalists and many of her friends and local supporters who were there waiting for her arrival.
They're reminding me to speak in English, because I'm having problems with that.
The voice trembles.
What's important for me to say is just thank you to everyone who's believed in me.
And then, before leaving, Amanda seems to say that she just wants to return to her private life.
I just want... My family's the most important thing to me right now, and I just want to go and be with them. So, thank you for being there for me.
Raffaele Sollecito also returns home, to Puglia, to his father's house. I've gotten my life back, he declares, but this will turn out to only be temporary. At this point in my investigation, years later, it was time for me to try to talk to him directly, so I headed to the address of his apartment building, far away from the cobblestones of Perugia.
Raffaele, sono Antonio Giovane. Non c'è...
I had to call Raffaele's cell phone when I got to his place. His name wasn't on the intercom. For good reason.
Grazie.
Murder in Perugia is a podcast by Antonio Giovane. The English language edition is a co-production of One Podcast and World Crunch, with editorial supervision by Anna Silvia Zippel and Jeff Israeli. Production support Paolo Prosperini, Giacomo Aloisi, Emma Albright, Erwan Issanchou, and Laurie Gaucher. Post-production and automated voice matching of Antonio Giovane's English narration by Odia.